I'm Mark Seifter.
And I'm Linda Zeiss Palmer.
And this is Arcane Mark. Hello, everyone.
Hi, welcome to Arcane Mark.
Welcome to Arcane Mark, Otherworlds and Alternate Realities.
So to start us off, let's talk about what is an otherworld and what is an alternate reality.
Yeah, what are we even talking about in this episode? Do you know? Because if we don't know, then we probably can't do it. So the term otherworld, when it is used as a single word, like we did in the episode, sort of, as far as I know, originally dates back to usage in discussing certain realms in mythology that heroes and other mythological characters journey to and experience that have their own rules that are different from the normal world. For example, many stories in Celtic mythology involve a voyage where someone on a ship goes to these various different other worlds that can be reached by virtue of like the metaphor of like the sea or the ocean as sort of something that connects between the world of the living and the mortal world and some other worlds, and these islands as metaphors for other worlds. But there's all sorts of usage of other worlds in various mythologies. There's Yggdrasil, the world tree, that has various realms in Norse mythology. Just about any one that you can find would have these. Sometimes they're called planes of existence in games like Dungeons & Dragons and Pathfinder.
Whereas an alternate reality is going to be sort of maybe it's a different timeline or a what if. It's going to be a reality that shares common features with the familiar world, but is different in some way. So it might be, the world, but if a giant dragon emerged from a crevice, or the world, but if a certain event didn't happen, or that kind of thing. It could also be the world, but in a different time period.
Yes.
So you'll see that and then the idea is to create a branching path or to gain something. So when you're presenting these other worlds and alternate realities in games, the first thing to keep in mind is that they're not other or alternate compared to our reality, because the baseline reality of a game is your standard campaign setting and location.
In fact, our world is a somewhat common otherworld or alternate reality to use in games, and is one that even a published Pathfinder AP, Rasputin Must Die, has used in the past. So, anything that is different than the game's normal world and setting is what we're talking about, because to us, the game world would be an otherworld. In fact, the product Battle Zoo Otherworlders is about people from Earth who get reincarnated or transported into the game world and often have some weird cheat ability that makes them powerful in that world.
Mm-hmm. Which riffs definitely on a lot of the tropes that you'll see in anime and light novels and things like that commonly nowadays, of like someone who is reincarnated into a different world, and so there's someone who's from another world and brings some kind of knowledge or other things with them.
Absolutely.
So when you're thinking about using other worlds and alternate realities in your game, one of the things to think about is, what does it take to reach them in the first place? And that's going to have a big impact on how often they're going to show up. If it's easy to reach an otherworld and there's like a continued connection between the two of them that is going to have like significant influence between the two of them flowing, or is it something that takes like some kind of great act or powerful magic, or like doing just the right thing at the right time in order to reach, in which case these places are going to not have as much of those cross influences.
In mythology and folklore, other worlds are usually somewhere that takes some amount of effort to get to, but that is still reachable for someone who has the skill, the courage, the determination to do so, such as those long voyages on a ship. But also there could be others who use magic or entreat the gods in the stories, or some other way to get to the other worlds. There can also be locations where, yeah, there is an other world that's just on the other side. It's a kind of a veil. And in some places, or at some times, the veil is thin between this world and the other world, allowing creatures to spill out from it or people to go from their world into the other world.
Or it may be in the mention here, I only like other worlds that are in wardrobes. It
Yes.
could be that there are a very limited number of gates that allow transit between our world and the other world, and those gates are not widely known or are only open under certain conditions.
That's right.
So when you're looking at the other world, one of the things that you'll need to consider is how challenging are things in the other world? Is this an other world where, like, you think about things like the plane of fires. Is this an other world where just things are on fire and you have to survive it? Or, like, everything's underwater and you need to be able to breathe underwater, or, like, sometimes other worlds can literally be other space worlds fill a pretty similar role. If it's like, okay, is this other world actually on another planet? And then in that case...
It's funny because you said other space worlds because you meant, like, there's a space
Yeah.
in between other and worlds, but
I
you
did.
mean
I literally mean
worlds
space
that are in
worlds.
space.
It had a double meaning.
Yes.
Yes. So they can definitely, particularly in a setting where you don't have, like, rocket ships going around all the time, being able to take you from one planet to another. It's on another planet works just as well as it's on a different plane of reality.
Yes. I mean, honestly, when you're looking back into weird old, like, ancient stories about other worlds, one that was from, like, the time of ancient Greece was a true story or a true history by Lucian Samosata, which was also thought to be the first science fiction novel because he was parodying people who make up complete lies about going to some other country and what they saw there with all this fantastical stuff. And basically, he in a parodying tone of the authors of these other things that he was making fun of, he talks about, like, going into outer space and meeting with, like, the royalty of, like, the sun and the moon and all these weird, like, creatures and other battles that they have out there. So, like, in the genre of an ancient otherworld story, there was literally a science fiction story all the way back there. So, yeah, absolutely, you can use the same premise. And in fact, science fiction and so therefore science fiction fantasy games like Starfinder often do find themes that are similar to those ancient otherworld legends and myths. Like, the episodic TV shows of science fiction are similar to those journeys from island to island in some of those ancient stories where it was like there's not that much of a through line narrative. It's just like they keep going to a different island and something else is going on there.
Yeah, and you have a sense there of a universe that is so open to exploration and so full of potential, and there's so many different things there's so many different wonders that you can uncover, and so many different ways that your characters can experience locations and circumstances and ways of life that would never have been possible on the world of their origin.
So why would you use an otherworld or an alternate reality in your game? Well, you might do it to shake things up or to give a taste of something that's different and unexpected and make people sort of go against their preconceptions. Like Linda said, other worlds have different rules, and sometimes those rules are deadly and hard to deal with. Sometimes they could be easier to deal with if you knew what they were, but you don't. For instance, something like time dilation, where the amount of time in the other world is different than the amount of time you spend somewhere else. You could take that into account if you knew, but you might not find out until after you already left the other world.
Yeah, it may be the case that time passes faster or slower in the other world, so when you return home, then things are different from what you'd expect if you didn't know that. Or, if there's another world where time passes slower, like, you might be able to take advantage of that to do more things, but then are there other consequences to doing that? Like, does your body accumulate all of the aging that it did in the other world at the moment you come back?
That's right. And so in that way, exploring an other world can be a great way to make things fresh and new in a way that has some ludonarrative connection where it's new and it's fresh for both the player and excuse me,
So
for both the player and the character who might not have ever experienced this other world whereas the normal fantasy world of your game is one that the player is new to or is attempting to roleplay, experiencing what the character has lived in throughout their life, and they should understand it.
messing with the fundamental physical and magical laws opens up ideas and strategies and plans that wouldn't otherwise exist. Like, if your PCs suddenly find themselves on a world that has super low gravity, but their bodies are accustomed to being under much higher gravity, and then suddenly that means that they can do giant leaps. So they're in a world where, like, say, a certain type of magic is much more powerful and effective and has these additional abilities, or a certain type of magic is less effective, and then they have to think about, okay, well, if I can't necessarily use these things, then what do I do? So, what advantages and disadvantages do the PCs face, and how is that going to shake up the ways the solutions that they can choose, whether that's, usually in some cases you'll have, some things that they would have otherwise done that don't work in this world, as well as things that only work because it is this world. And I'd say that a good Otherworld story is definitely going to have some of both of those.
That's right. Otherworlds sometimes, by being different, allow us to speak in a metaphor or imply a thematic connection to something in the ordinary world, or in this case, the ordinary fantasy world of the setting. Alternate realities sometimes do that even more directly than Otherworlds. They can allow you to directly explore the idea of another aspect of a character or country or setting's personality by having them be reversed for an evil mirror universe or different in a certain way, or explore a what-if situation. For instance, it could allow, in a world where the PCs are just always succeeding and all the bad guys never do anything and it just feels like, we just always win, it could allow for a what-if of, like, to show how much they accomplished, what they stopped by exploring an alternate reality where the PCs never existed.
Yeah. And then, are they going to be saving that alternate reality? Or, maybe that's too much interference, and what they're trying to do while they're there is gather information about the ultimate plans of their foes, because it's like, oops, we totally destroyed their evil warehouse or whatever, and so we lost the chance to find the clues about what was going on here, what they were planning. So it can be a chance to explore how characters would act under certain other circumstances, how they would develop, or when you're talking for the more similar ones that are the what if ones. And then for the sort of mirror universe ones, one of the fun things that it gets into is what expectations and information can you take from what you already know and then apply that. And by you, in that case, I mean the players. And what things are subverted. So, like, if you have a true mirror where it's like, well, things are where you've got opposite day going on. It's like, well, I know that, in our world, the general had two choices of what to do in this particular situation, and she chose option A, so she's going to choose option B, because, in our world, the general was, like, more, like, careful and cautious, so that means that the general in this world is actually going to be really reckless, and so you can, like, try to play around with those expectations. It can be fun to just turn everything on its head that way.
Yeah, I've done that before. Like, in one of my early games, the 3 PCs that were in it were an Azer who loved mortals and wanted to live among mortals and sort of learn about them, and a barbarian wild elf who was just, like, very surprisingly, like, had high mental ability scores, and, like, people would think of barbarians as being just like all about smashing, but, like, this barbarian, like, was very much about alternative solutions and very sociable. And a elf wizard who was startlingly incompetent to the point where, like, he bumbled and created so many horrible things for, like, himself and especially for the entire elven ancestry that many other elves assumed that he was an evil mastermind who had done this on purpose. And eventually he was like, I think if I worked really hard, I could clear this up. But I've realized that I don't want people to realize exactly how incompetent I was. So I'm just going to embrace the evil that I did all this on purpose.
And be an evil mastermind.
And so that wizard, during one of his bumbling episodes, managed to stumble into an alternate universe. And in this universe, his Azer fellow party member was a mortal hunter, which is a prestige class from 3.0 or 3.5 of just like for exoplanar creatures who hate mortals and want to hunt and kill them. And they come to the mortal world to hunt them for sport. And the barbarian was just like a vicious barbarian who just like frenziedly murdered everybody who was around. And he had, the wizard had accidentally swapped himself for his alternate version, which was a wizard who just basically had a reputation of being a great hero who saved the day constantly and was the greatest wizard, but actually just bumbled into it by mistake, constantly just messing up and accidentally doing the right thing. And so we split it up, and so the wizard had to survive getting away from the mortal hunter, cleric, Azer, and the berserker barbarian, and try to find a way back to his own world. While meanwhile, on the other world, they had this replacement version of their wizard. And the replacement version of their wizard, like, bubbled around, and, like, during a fight where they were trying to fight this really powerful enemy lich, like, he accidentally stumbled into a secret passage, and then accidentally used the Lich's phylactery as a material component for a spell, which destroyed it. The party was like, wow, can we just keep the alternate reality version of our wizard? Meanwhile, the wizard was working really hard to get back. So the wizard had a sister who hated him because of the fact that due to his many antics when he summoned demons and, like, made deals with them that allowed them to do whatever they wanted as long as it wasn't in the local area. So they went off into and wreaked havoc on the elves who were not in the local area. So his sister hated him. But in the alternate reality world, instead of his sister being a good aligned cleric of Sahani Mumbo, she was an evil priestess who was the black sheep of the family instead of the wizard being the black sheep of the family. And so he managed to team up with his evil sister to do a ritual and find a way to send himself back to the original reality. And then also the evil sister would kill and replace just replace the good sister. Then the good sister could be living with the good version of the others,
flipping her into the other reality.
That was the plan that he agreed to, of just like replacing his sister with his evil sister. So that was a whole Otherworld story. The upshot of it was that the evil sister pretended to be the good sister, so she was sick of being like exiled, and the party never realized that it was the evil sister until the wizard actually embezzled most of the party's shared treasury, which was being kept by the sister, since she was the most trustworthy person. She was an NPC. And then the wizard kind of revealed to the other characters, my sister was somehow replaced with an evil alternate reality version of herself. And now all the money that she was holding on to is missing. She must have stolen it, which she didn't. She actually kept it completely fine. And then they checked it, and the money was missing. And they were like, they used spells, and like, oh my gosh, it was an alternate reality version of his sister.
And then she's like,
it really was. It really was. And
we had it planned.
And he had already like knocked her out so that she couldn't speak for herself. But he allowed the other character, like the cleric, to use a spell to determine it's like she is really the alternate evil sister. And they banished her back to the alternate reality and never figured out that the wizard actually set up his evil sister. So,
Yep.
These are the kind of stories you could tell with alternate realities.
How long ago? That was a really long time ago. That was before we met.
Super long ago.
Was that when you were still in high school?
Yes. That was like 20 years ago. So it was a long time ago. Yeah, so you could tell these kind of stories which highlight different aspects of the characters, different aspects of their foils, and in this case, it revealed aspects of the character of the traveling wizard that would not have necessarily been as easy to explore if we just kept it in the regular setting alone.
Another thing that this is making me think about based on something that you did in a session is the potential for a setting with otherworlds and alternate realities to create crossovers.
Yes.
So, like, for example, when we had a crossover between two, where the parties from two of our different campaigns wound up coming together in another world to fight against a ridiculously powerful foe.
That's right, because I think both of them. One of them had somebody who was like captured and imprisoned by the deck of many things, and the other one had someone who was captured in the shadow plane anyway. So I decided that deck of many things capture was in the shadow plane, which connects to many alternate realities, and so therefore they came from two entirely different settings with entirely different pantheons through the shadow plane, and then both parties fought together against a ridiculous shadow threat, saving both of their missing party members from that.
That was really epic. Yeah.
Crossover episode.
And when you do crossovers too, one of the things that can be interesting is this was a crossover where, you know, both of the character sets were built in 3.5, so they're built on like the same engine and things like that. But you can even have crossovers where characters are sort of like temporarily converted into a whole other mechanical underlying framework and system. That's definitely something that creates the feeling of an other world when it's like, oh my gosh, like I have these completely different abilities that still thematically echo the kinds of things that character would do in their primary world, but it really hammers home more than anything else. Like if you have a group that plays multiple game systems, it's like, well, you know, this character is used to being like a sniper in like a sniper type character in like Blades in the Dark or whatever, and then I move them over to Pathfinder, and it's like, oh wait, you know, I need to plan my things out, but also like I have all this equipment, and like what is even going on? So
excuse me,
like they have the same personality and motivations
I have
and goals.
3 equipment. I'll decide what they are later on.
Yes, exactly. So yeah, that can really hammer home the difference there. I would say that one thing with Otherworlds is that the more that something is different, you know, unless you're literally being like, yeah, I want to migrate my whole campaign over to this because people love this kind of thing and they really want to stay. The more that something is different, the more that it functions well as like a nice change of pace and break before you then go back to like what is more normal or typical, because otherwise you're just like completely changing the direction of what you're doing.
Absolutely.
So that's something to think about with your Otherworld thing too. It's like, do you want to move your campaign over here to the long term, or is this like, or do they have a concrete objective? Because once you've introduced the Otherworld, if there's not like as much of a concrete, this is our goal of what we're going to do here, then they could wind up there for a while. So, you know, is there common reason to go to an Otherworld or alternate reality might be like, you just discovered the pathway, or it might be that there is some kind of item or person or thing or information that cannot be found in your world because it doesn't exist there or it can't thrive there. So it's like, you know, this is something that was destroyed in our world, but in an alternate reality it's still there. Or it might be like, you know, the strength of magic on our world is insufficient to pull off this particular thing, but other worlds have sufficiently powerful magic, and so if we can gather things up to open the gateway to the other world, then we can bring back, you know, this seed of power to allow us to perform whatever it is that we're trying to do.
Yes. So that is a sample of reasons why you might want to use an Otherworld, which again could be a planet, could be a time frame of your own world, because sometimes you have weird time frames that, especially in fantasy settings, where it's just like, if you go back far enough, sometimes there's a weird advanced civilization in the past that feels like an entirely other world with its own common sense. So the setting of an otherworld does not have to literally be a plane.
And you can also the idea of other worlds, when you look at like time travel and things like that, also intersects with alternate realities in the sense that you're often then looking at the many branching paths of fate, because the many branching paths of fate is a useful tool, because if you say this is our one canonical through line of time and we're going back and editing things, then it's very easy to run into contradictions, or like this time loop could have never been entered because this thing wasn't here or this thing was here, and then you have to get into like what is the nature of time. So having a thing where it's like, okay, you know, this represents creating a branch in fate where things play out differently from here on out, but on your branch, you know, you didn't do these things in the past. Or you say, you know, you did do those things in the past and they had like but the time stream is resilient and tried to repair itself in the way that required the least changes. So like, you know, then once you go back into the future, there are some ripples and ramifications, but like not as many as you would necessarily expect there to be if actually everything happened in that different way, and like a whole slew of people that would have been born wound up not being born, and then like all these things about history were different, because there is some suspension of disbelief in just saying the time stream rewrites itself, that has to happen and those kinds of things to make sense. You
have to say that time is more resilient because realistically just like small amounts of shifting in the way, like, you know, like within seconds or minutes of what people were doing would then cause them to like probably pass on different genetics to their children, and then like everybody would be different by like some number of butterfly flight levels.
Yeah. Or like, you know, what happens if your 13 times great grandparents never met?
Yes.
Like how many people would have never been born in that case and all that kind of stuff.
That's
right. So yeah.
It looks like Cyrad says that they've used and seen alternate realities for an unusual purpose to let PCs interact with characters they normally wouldn't be able to, like NPCs that are dead in our reality but alive in another. Like Linda was saying about if something exists in the other reality but doesn't.
Yeah, that's a great point, that it doesn't have to be like an object. It could be like a person that's not around.
That's right. Absolutely. Like that is a way to use an alternate reality, as potentially can also be a siren song for someone, like a Lotus Eater situation, to give an example of, you know, the ancient Greek go on boats to different other worlds or different very strange places where you want to get stuck in the alternate reality because it has someone that you don't want to lose. Like, I mean, that's essentially the plot of Final Fantasy Tactics Advance is, no, other worlds are bad and you should not try to be stuck in them to have your issues be solved and have the people that you lost be there. You should go back to the original world.
And when you're talking about sort of that type of like, this is a world that has something that your world doesn't, so like naturally people would feel a pull to remain there. That kind of other world, that makes me think about like trials in dream worlds and things like that. So like it doesn't even need to necessarily be like a physical location that you go to. It could be a place that your mind goes to. It could be a dream. It could be like a psychic trial. It could be some kind of another, as long as like it's something that your character's like moving around and interacting with. Like it doesn't matter if it is a place that has a physical existence.
Speaking of dream trials, and also an idea from Chad about going to find the previous BBG to talk to them, like another example of these kind of other worlds are the otherworldly dungeons from Battlezoo Ancestry's dungeons, which are like extraplanar dungeons that often reflect some kind of metaphorical truth about the dungeon and its avatar. And one of the types of dungeons that are described in the expanded version is one that's sort of like a contains the souls and regrets of those who like have been defeated by the dungeon or by like the party of the avatar. And so you wind up going through and defeating these or being able to talk to or interact with these shades of previous characters. And I mentioned in the description of that it can give you a chance to explore some aspects of the backstories of characters who normally in the main campaign appear and like attack immediately and are killed within 18 seconds.
Or even if they're a character that you as the GM were setting up and we're like, this character has like an important role to play as I'm planning in the story, and then the PCs are like, nope. And they defeat them much earlier. Then it's like, well, you could potentially still use that as a route to get the PC some of the clues and information that they would have otherwise been expected to get from that person.
Yep. And since there mentions a dream island, to give an example of one of the hero destroys the other world. There are lots of famous hero destroys the other world tales, such as Link's Awakening and in video games. Yes. And Final Fantasy Tactics Advance. Although only Wind Waker has main character destroys the regular original world and just like, let's deal with the post-apocalyptic one. But it has the same vibe to it of like, you can't cling to a fantasy or an otherworld.
Yeah.
It's sort of treated as an otherworld in that point.
Yeah, and those can work well for like characters building the resolve to move forward or finding something within themselves. Like whenever they fit that sort of, this is a trial, maybe there are certain things about that world that are challenging and that represent things that particular character needs to overcome. For this, I'm thinking about like the trials of like in World of Darkness Mage, where
like
it's
those seekings?
The seekings that you have, where it's like, you're transported into sort of like an other world that has things that are metaphorical, that are based off of the challenges that you personally need to overcome in order to grow.
In order to reach enlightenment.
The
quandaries that are holding you back.
Yes.
Fetters upon your metaphysical existence. Yeah, absolutely. So there's all sorts of great uses for otherworlds and alternate realities. And sometimes you aren't thinking of all that deep metaphysical stuff and you just want a cool, weird place to do encounters.
Yeah, that's equally
That's on
valid.
fire, and that's fine.
If you're just like, it would be cool if we were in a place that had low gravity and people could do super jumps, and then they have like these new, and then they can do like pile driver attacks, or like, it would be cool if we were in a place where like the magic that these characters have was supercharged, or like, or it's like, I've been noticing lately that like my players have fallen into a bit of a rut where like they're always using these particular tactics in fights, and they seem to be getting kind of bored with the combats, but this is a way to really shake things up and try something out new. Or like, you want to introduce different expectations. You want to introduce you've built out a pretty strong sense of what kinds of things are possible in your world, and you are feeling constrained by that in some way.
That's true. You can reach that point when like people just sort of have a basic understanding of the way things work in the general fantasy world. It's no longer sort of an exploration and this is new and exciting, and it's more of a we know everything. This can happen, especially in published settings, if all of the players are actually familiar with the published setting, and they're like, yeah, we've already read that book too. Mm-hmm. Otherworlds and alternate realities can help shake things up in that point. It also can if you're in a more constrained overall setting within a larger setting. In that case, even just the visiting another country or continent could suffice for the same metaphorical usage as Otherworlds have in most of this episode.
Otherworlds also let you do things with stakes that you may not otherwise be able to do. Like, it might be the case that, there's something that would prevent the world that the PCs come from being destroyed, but you want to tell a, like, save the world type story. It's like, yes, our world isn't going to be destroyed because there's a council of 20th level people who are like being the guardians against like the top tier threats, and so therefore like there can't be a world shattering threat that would exist for people who are like 10th or 11th level. But you want to tell that kind of story, then you can say, oh well, maybe there's an other world that could be facing those kinds of challenges, or maybe because I think classically the way that other worlds and planes are presented in Pathfinder is that they're seen as being like higher level areas that you go to because you've already gotten a solid baseline in the world that is more familiar, and then now these places allow you to have challenges that escalate ever higher. They allow you to have things that are, this is a world where there are many immortal beings, or this is a world where magic flows more freely and is commonplace, or this is a world where something about it is different that sets the baseline differently. Because if your PCs, maybe that your PCs have outgrown the area of the world that they're in, and there aren't necessarily easy ways to introduce challenges that are going to go up. It's like, well, our group is a heist group, and we love doing all these kinds of heists and like taking resources and things like that, but we've already like broken into and stolen the like some of the most powerful treasures of the kingdom from the palace or whatever. And it's like, well, where do we go from here? How do we challenge ourselves? And then maybe you are looking at like, okay, are they going to be taking their adventure to the next level elsewhere?
Yeah, absolutely. Because there's a way to take a heist to the next level, because you could heist Abadar's vault.
Yes.
So let's see. Sire had mentioned in the previous campaign they entered a realm where they were actors in a play written by their enemy, and all their powers were reflavored as special effects.
Like the monk flying king with wires, the oracle got petrified being dropped through a trapdoor and replaced with a prop statue. Oh man, that's great.
There you go. Yeah, it can always be fun to take a look at things that way. That reminds me of Avatar: The Last Airbender, the episode where they watched the propaganda Fire Nation play that was being put on about their journeys.
Mm-hmm.
That, like, it seems like there's some parallels there. So, yeah, I think I went through a lot of, like, the history and usage of Otherworlds that I was thinking about. What about you, Linda?
I think I went through what I had prepped here. So I think.
All right, let's say bye to YouTube.
Let's say goodbye to YouTube.
Bye, YouTube.
Bye.
See you next time, YouTube.